The rain had been falling for days when the stagecoach rolled into Millbrook Hollow, wheels sinking into the sucking mud of the forest road. The driver swore he'd seen a light, a faint, golden glow trembling between the dark branches. By the time he reached it, the forest had gone still, as though the night itself were listening. There it stood, the Millbrook Inn, 2 stories high, pale timbered walls glistening under the downpour, and smoke curling lazily from the chimney. On the porch, 2 women waited, dressed in white despite the mud, their faces serene, their hands clasped as if in prayer. They introduced themselves as the Cunningham sisters, Margaret and Eliza, and their voices carried a softness that seemed to quiet the storm. Inside, the inn was impossibly warm. The fire crackled, filling the air with the scent of cedar and wild roses. The sisters moved gracefully, their eyes never breaking from the traveler's face, as though they saw something precious in him. "No one should be alone on a night like this," Margaret whispered, pouring wine that tasted faintly of copper. Above, the stairs creaked with the rhythm of unseen footsteps. When he asked who else was staying, Eliza only smiled. Those who found love here never truly left. That night, as thunder rolled across the valley, he awoke to music drifting through the floorboards, 2 voices humming a lullaby that didn't seem to end. He followed the sound down the hallway, past doors slightly ajar, past the scent of lilies so strong it made his eyes water. At the end stood a window overlooking the woods, and beyond it, moonlight glinting off rows of stones half buried in the wet earth. 43 of them, each marked only with a single letter, M. He turned to call out, but the hallway was empty. Only the whisper of 2 voices remained, soft as the rain. "Stay with us," they breathed. Love never leaves Millbrook. In the year 1847, nestled deep within the whispering woods of Millbrook, Kentucky, the Millbrook Inn first opened its doors. The establishment was unlike any other in the region, an elegant wooden manor built along a forgotten road, surrounded by dense forests and endless fog that seemed to breathe with the earth itself. The inn promised weary travelers refuge, warmth, and companionship during long and treacherous journeys through the frontier. Behind this promise stood 2 sisters, Margaret and Eliza Cunningham, whose charm and grace quickly became the talk of nearby towns. They were known for their beauty, their kindness, and their uncanny ability to make anyone feel at home, no matter how lost or broken they arrived. To most, the sisters seemed to be a blessing, 2 women offering comfort in a world that often forgot tenderness. But there was something about them, something unspoken, that lingered in the air like perfume, sweet, yet heavy enough to make the heart uneasy. The inn itself carried a strange magnetism. Its walls were lined with imported furniture and velvet drapes that didn't belong in such a remote place. Travelers who stopped there spoke of laughter that echoed softly through the night and the aroma of freshly baked bread always wafting from the kitchen, no matter the hour. Margaret, the elder sister, handled the guests with poised hospitality, her soft-spoken manner and steady gaze creating a sense of safety that lulled even the most cautious soul. Eliza, the younger, was more playful, often found humming old hymns or brushing the dust from a guest's coat with an affection that felt both innocent and unsettling. Together, they ran the Millbrook Inn as if it were not just a business, but a sanctuary, a place where every visitor became part of a quiet ritual of care, devotion, and something deeper that no one could name. Though the town of Millbrook was small, word of the Cunningham sisters spread fast. Wagon drivers, merchants, and drifters passing through spoke highly of the inn, of how peaceful it felt, how time itself seemed to slow once inside its walls. Yet, beneath these stories ran a faint, uneasy undertone. A few travelers never returned home. Some were last seen smiling on the inn's porch, bathed in the warm lamplight of the Cunningham sisters' welcome. When their families came searching, the sisters offered gentle condolences, claiming the men had left at dawn toward the next town. No one questioned them, not at first. For the Millbrook Inn, with its twin caretakers of impossible grace, had become a place wrapped in beauty and mystery, where love and hospitality were given freely, and where, perhaps, they were also kept forever. Travelers who arrived at the Millbrook Inn often spoke of an atmosphere that felt almost enchanted, as if the very walls hummed with quiet warmth. The Cunningham sisters, Margaret and Eliza, had a way of making each visitor feel uniquely seen and deeply cherished. Their hospitality went beyond simple kindness, it carried an intensity that bordered on devotion. Guests described how the sisters remembered every detail, names, stories, fears, even the smallest gestures. They would listen for hours by the fire, their eyes gleaming in the flicker of candlelight, their voices soft and hypnotic. For those weary from the harshness of the road, this attention felt like salvation. Margaret would tend to a guest's wounds or pour them tea with steady, deliberate movements, while Eliza would hum old love songs as she brushed the dust from their coats. Within minutes, even the most hardened traveler felt disarmed, their loneliness melting into a strange, comforting warmth that seemed to wrap around them like a quilt. Many who stayed at the inn would later claim they had never known such peace. The rooms glowed with lamplight that softened every corner, and the scent of lavender and baked bread drifted constantly through the air. At night, the sisters would sit with their guests, telling gentle stories of the land, of the stars that hung low above the Kentucky hills, and of the fleeting nature of love. Margaret spoke of love as something eternal, something that must be preserved beyond the boundaries of flesh and time. Eliza would smile dreamily beside her, watching the flames dance in the hearth as though seeing something others could not. It was in these quiet hours that guests began to feel a peculiar attachment to the place, a reluctance to leave, as if Millbrook itself held them in a tender, invisible embrace. Yet, there was a strangeness beneath this affection, something subtle and unsettling. The sisters never seemed to age, their beauty unchanging even as seasons passed. Their eyes, while kind, sometimes held an untraceable sorrow, a depth that made guests wonder what they had lost, or what they were hiding. Travelers would awaken in the night to find one of the sisters standing silently at their doorway, her face unreadable in the half-dark, murmuring something too faint to understand. And still, despite these moments, every visitor left singing their praises, speaking of the sisters' love as though it had changed them. None suspected that the same warmth which soothed them might also be what bound them to the inn forever, in ways neither flesh nor spirit could undo. As the months passed and the Millbrook Inn continued to welcome travelers, the nearby towns began to stir with unease. Too many visitors who had stayed with the Cunningham sisters seemed to vanish without a trace. At first, no one thought much of it, roads were treacherous, storms common, and the forests vast enough to swallow a man whole. But as the list of the missing grew, whispers began to curl through taverns and churchyards. It was said that those who spent the night at Millbrook often never reached their next destination. Their wagons were found abandoned along the road, their horses tethered to trees, their personal belongings intact, but the men themselves gone. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, only silence and the faint lingering scent of lilies that seemed to follow every disappearance. Locals started to recall strange details that had once seemed harmless. The sisters were often seen in the early dawn, walking hand in hand through the fog-draped fields behind the inn, carrying shovels and bundles wrapped in white cloth. They said it was for the garden, but no one ever saw the flowers bloom there. The sheriff at the time, a cautious man named Daniel Reeve, visited the inn once after hearing that a merchant from Lexington had disappeared. He found the sisters calm and composed, their voices as smooth as silk, their eyes clear and innocent. They offered him tea, invited him to rest by the fire, and spoke warmly of the merchant, insisting he had left at first light. Everything appeared spotless, the rooms neatly made, the floors scrubbed clean, and yet the air felt heavy, as if it held the memory of too many breaths. Word began to spread that the forest near the inn was cursed. Hunters claimed they heard voices calling softly from the trees, whispering their names in tones both tender and mournful. Some swore they saw pale figures moving behind the windows when the sisters were supposed to be alone. Even the bravest men hesitated to travel the Millbrook Road after sunset. Yet, strangely, new visitors kept arriving, drawn by the same warmth and comfort that others had described before disappearing. It was as though the inn itself beckoned to the lonely, the broken, and the lost, offering them a kind of love that felt eternal. And still, no one could say for certain where the missing had gone, only that those who fell under the sisters' gentle spell never seemed to find their way out of the woods again. It was a wandering drifter named Thomas Hale who first uncovered the truth that began to unravel the illusion surrounding the Millbrook Inn. Hale had been traveling the Kentucky backroads for years, a man accustomed to hardship and secrets. One autumn evening, as the sun fell behind the tree line and the mist began to rise from the forest floor, he set up camp not far from the inn. He had heard of the Cunningham sisters, how their hospitality was unmatched, how their inn was a haven for those passing through, but something in him distrusted places that seemed too perfect. That night, while gathering firewood, he noticed a patch of ground that looked freshly disturbed. The earth was softer there, the fallen leaves piled unevenly as though someone had tried to cover something in a hurry. When his boots struck wood beneath the soil, curiosity overcame caution. He knelt, brushed away the dirt, and found a crude wooden cross, unmarked and leaning slightly to one side. Beneath it lay a mound of earth carefully shaped, and resting atop it was a bouquet of white lilies, their petals impossibly fresh despite the chill of early frost. The discovery chilled him to the bone. Graves were not uncommon in those parts, many travelers died on the road, but something about this one felt wrong. It was too deliberate, too lovingly tended. There were no initials carved into the cross, no sign of prayer or farewell. Only those pristine lilies, placed with almost reverent care. Hale looked toward the inn in the distance, its windows glowing faintly through the trees, and he thought he saw a figure standing by the upstairs window, still, watching, as though waiting for him to notice. A strange sound drifted on the wind, a soft hum that might have been a woman's voice. The melody was tender, haunting, and heartbreakingly sweet. He returned to town the next morning and told the sheriff what he had found. Some dismissed him as a drunk or a fool, but others listened, for the disappearances had gone on too long to be coincidence. When the sheriff rode out to inspect the site, the lilies were gone. The soil had been smoothed over, and the cross was missing, as if the earth itself had swallowed the evidence. Still, those who went near the grove swore they smelled flowers long before they saw the inn, and a few said they heard footsteps behind them when no one was there. It was then that the whispers about the Cunningham sisters began to take a darker turn, for people started to wonder whether the women's love for their guests had been the kind that ended not with farewell, but with burial. Sheriff Daniel Reeve was not a man easily swayed by rumor. He had heard the townsfolk's anxious whispers about the Millbrook Inn for months, the missing travelers, the strange singing at night, the graves said to lie in the woods, but he believed in reason, not superstition. Still, when the fourth disappearance in as many months was reported, he decided to see for himself what truth, if any, lay behind the stories. He rode to the inn one mist-heavy morning, the forest damp and silent except for the soft clip of his horse's hooves. As he approached, the air seemed to grow colder, and though the sun had risen, the light felt dim beneath the canopy of black oaks. When the inn finally appeared, it looked almost dreamlike, its whitewashed walls glistening with dew, its porch framed with garlands of dried lilies. Margaret Cunningham greeted him first, her calm smile both warm and unsettling. Her sister Eliza appeared moments later, her eyes bright and curious, as if she already knew why he had come. The sisters welcomed him without hesitation, ushering him inside where the scent of herbs and sweet wine lingered. The fire was already burning, and the room seemed almost too perfect, no dust, no signs of wear, everything polished and gleaming. They offered him tea, insisting he rest after his long ride, and though their manners were impeccable, Reeve felt something unnatural in their composure. He asked them directly about the missing travelers, about the merchant last seen at their inn, but their expressions did not waver. Margaret's voice remained soft and steady as she told him that the man had left before sunrise, claiming he was bound for Lexington. Eliza added gently that they prayed for all their guests' safe journeys. What struck Reeve most was the stillness that followed each of their answers. No nervous glances, no sign of guilt, just a serene, unwavering calm that made his skin crawl. When he excused himself to walk the grounds, the sisters watched him from the porch, their hands clasped as if in silent prayer. Behind the inn, he found a small patch of disturbed soil near the tree line, but nothing that could be called evidence. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he was being observed, not by one pair of eyes, but by many. The forest seemed to listen to his every breath. Before leaving, he turned back to see Margaret standing in the doorway, her lips curved in a faint smile that carried no warmth at all. Though he found nothing to prove the townsfolk's fears, Reeve left with a chill deep in his bones, convinced that the sisters' innocence was not as pure as it seemed, and that beneath their gentle voices lay something older, darker, and infinitely patient. It was a young traveler named Samuel Pike who first discovered the strange door in the basement of the Millbrook Inn. He had arrived on a night of relentless rain, his clothes soaked through and his spirit weary from days on the road. The Cunningham sisters welcomed him with their usual grace, offering dry clothes, hot soup, and a bed beside the hearth. Their kindness seemed almost otherworldly, and though Samuel was grateful, he could not shake a faint sense of unease. The inn was too quiet, too immaculate, and he noticed that every corner smelled faintly of lilies, even in places where flowers could not possibly be. That night, as the storm raged outside, he woke to a sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere beneath the floorboards. At first he thought it was the wind, but the noise grew clearer, a deliberate knocking that seemed to echo in patterns, as if someone was trying to speak through the walls. Curiosity got the better of him. He lit a lantern and followed the sound down the narrow hallway that led to the servants' stairs. The lower he went, the colder the air became, carrying a damp, metallic scent. The basement was small and lined with shelves of preserves and wine, but in the far corner stood a wooden door sealed shut with thick nails and coarse rope wound tightly across its frame. It looked as though someone had tried very hard to keep it closed. Samuel approached, his lantern trembling in his hand, and for a moment the sound stopped entirely. Then, from behind the door, came a faint, muffled cry, soft and human, filled with the fragile panic of someone who had been pleading for too long. His heart pounded as he stumbled backward, the lantern nearly slipping from his grasp. He whispered a question into the dark, but no voice answered, only a low humming began to seep through the cracks in the door, a familiar melody that he realized he had heard earlier that evening, the tune the sisters had been humming by the fire. Terrified, he rushed upstairs to wake them, but the sisters were already standing in the hallway, waiting. Their faces were calm, their eyes shining as though they had been expecting him. Margaret placed a finger to her lips, a gesture both gentle and chilling, and said softly, "There are some doors in this house that must never be opened, no matter how much love calls from the other side." Before he could reply, the lantern flickered out, plunging the corridor into darkness. The next morning, the sisters told the townsfolk that Samuel had left before dawn, heading north toward Louisville. No one ever saw him again. By the spring of 1851, fear had fully taken root in Millbrook. The disappearances had become too many to ignore, and whispers turned into outrage. When a local boy named Aaron Little vanished after delivering firewood to the inn, the patience of the townsfolk shattered. Families gathered in the square, torches flaring in the damp night air, demanding answers. Sheriff Daniel Reeve, haunted by his earlier visit and the memory of the sisters' serene, unflinching eyes, could no longer defend them. He led a group of men through the forest, their boots sinking into the mud as thunder rolled over the hills. The rain fell hard that night, as if the heavens themselves were trying to wash something away. By the time they reached the clearing, the Millbrook Inn stood eerily still, its windows dark, the air heavy with the scent of lilies. The front door was unlocked, creaking open at the sheriff's touch. Inside, every candle had been extinguished, yet the rooms were in perfect order. The tables were set for dinner, plates gleaming, wine poured into crystal glasses untouched. The fireplace still smoldered faintly, filling the air with the ghost of warmth. Upstairs, the beds were neatly made, the sheets pristine, as if no one had ever slept in them. The sisters were nowhere to be found. It was as if they had vanished into the mist. The men searched every corner, calling their names, tearing through closets and cupboards, but the silence was complete. Then one of the townsmen found a trail of footprints in the back garden, 2 sets, side by side, leading into the grove behind the inn. The tracks ended abruptly near the old willow tree, the ground beneath freshly disturbed, though no shovel or tool lay nearby. Reeve ordered the men to dig, but the soil was thick and heavy from rain. After an hour of frantic labor, one of them struck something hard. It was not a coffin, but a wooden box filled with dried flowers, ribbons, and locks of human hair, each tied with care and labeled with names no one recognized. The men recoiled in horror, and as lightning flashed across the sky, someone swore they saw two pale figures standing at the edge of the woods, watching silently before fading into the shadows. When the digging stopped, the inn remained untouched. No one dared burn it, for fear of what might be released. The sisters were never seen again, but on quiet nights, travelers claimed they could still see candlelight flickering in the upstairs windows, and hear soft laughter carried on the wind, like the echo of a farewell that was never meant to end. Days after the disappearance of the Cunningham sisters, the townsfolk of Millbrook returned to the grove behind the inn, driven by both fear and grim determination. The air was thick with decay and rain, the ground soft beneath their boots as they began to dig near the old willow where the footprints had last been seen. What they found beneath the soil was unlike anything they had imagined. Row after row of graves emerged from the earth, each one carefully marked with a simple wooden cross, the surface adorned with remnants of dried lilies and strands of silk ribbon. The graves stretched farther than the eye could see, 43 in total. Each appeared freshly tended, the soil neatly packed, the crosses evenly spaced. The precision of it chilled the men more than blood ever could. These were not the chaotic burials of murder, they were deliberate, reverent, almost ceremonial. When the graves were opened, what lay inside silenced even the most hardened among them. The bodies, though decomposed by time, bore an unsettling preservation. Their clothes were clean, their hands folded neatly over their chests, and in several graves, the faces of the dead had been dusted with some kind of pale powder, as if to preserve the illusion of life. No signs of violence marked their flesh, no knife wounds, no gunshot scars, nothing that spoke of rage or cruelty. Instead, the remains seemed to rest in eerie peace, as though they had been laid down by loving hands. In each grave, the same detail repeated, a single white lily placed over the heart, still faintly fragrant, though impossibly old. Sheriff Reeve stood over the rows of open graves, his stomach twisting with disbelief. The missing travelers, the townsfolk's lost kin, the vanished boy, they were all here, sleeping in perfect symmetry beneath the trees. Beside some graves, they found small items, a wedding ring, a pocket watch, a torn page from a letter that read only, "She loved me as no one ever had." The evidence suggested not murder born of hate, but of obsession, an affection so consuming that it sought to trap love in its most unchanging form. As the men filled the graves once more, a strange calm settled over the woods. The air grew still, and the scent of lilies returned, stronger than before. Some claimed to hear soft singing echoing between the trees, two voices intertwined in mournful harmony. When they turned back toward the inn, the windows glowed faintly once again, though no one had lit a fire there since the sisters disappeared. Months after the graves were uncovered, the Millbrook Inn was left to rot under the weight of silence. The once lively halls grew thick with dust, the walls warped from rain seeping through broken panes. But the story did not end there. During an attempt to catalogue what remained of the sisters' estate, the sheriff and a few townsmen discovered a hidden compartment behind the bookshelf in the sisters' private quarters. Inside was a small wooden chest bound with a faded crimson ribbon. When opened, it revealed a stack of delicate letters written in elegant, looping script, letters that told the story of the Cunningham sisters in a way no one had ever imagined. The handwriting alternated between Margaret and Eliza, their words filled with a disturbing tenderness. They spoke not of guilt or fear, but of love, love that transcended death, love that refused to decay. Margaret's letters were the most coherent, describing a belief that the human heart, once filled with true affection, should never be allowed to fade or be corrupted by time. She wrote of guests who arrived lonely, broken, unloved by the world, and how she and Eliza sought to give them what no one else could, everlasting peace through preservation. Love, she wrote, should not be fleeting. It must be sealed before it rots. Her tone was calm, her logic chilling in its conviction. Eliza's letters were more emotional, her words scattered and poetic, filled with references to dreams and voices that guided her. She mentioned the ones who sleep beneath the willow, and how they whispered gratitude in her sleep. She wrote that Margaret had found the way to preserve the warmth of devotion through rituals that kept the essence of love alive, even after the heart had stopped beating. Among the letters was a list of names, 43 in total, each accompanied by a date and a single note such as gentle eyes, smiled before sleep, or forgave me. The final letter, dated the night before their disappearance, was written jointly. In it, the sisters expressed that they had completed their life's purpose and were now ready to join those they had preserved in purity. They described the graveyard not as a burial site but as a garden of devotion, where love would never wilt. The last line read, "We shall return when the world learns to love without fear." After the letters were taken away, no one dared stay in the inn. Yet even as the words were locked in the sheriff's office, some claimed that the scent of lilies followed them home, clinging faintly to the paper as though the sisters' devotion had not yet let them go. Even decades after the Millbrook Inn had fallen into ruin, the story of the Cunningham sisters refused to fade from local memory. The townsfolk who had survived the events, or who had grown up hearing whispers from their elders, spoke in hushed tones about sightings and sounds that could not be explained. On misty nights, travelers passing near the hollow swore they saw candlelight flickering through the upper windows of the abandoned inn, though no one lived there, and no fire had been lit in years. Some claimed to hear the faint strains of a lullaby drifting through the fog, two female voices harmonizing in a slow, haunting cadence that seemed to wrap around the trees and seep into the bones of anyone nearby. Horses refused to enter the clearing, dogs whimpered and turned back, and the wind carried with it the unmistakable scent of white lilies, strong and sweet, as if the flowers themselves had been preserved in the damp soil of the grove behind the inn. Occasionally, those daring enough to approach the remains of the inn reported fleeting glimpses of pale figures moving behind broken panes, always watching, always still. Some said the figures were the sisters themselves, continuing their eternal vigil over the 43 graves hidden in the woods. Others claimed the shadows were different, fainter, more ethereal, as if the love the sisters had bestowed upon their guests had somehow lingered, trapped in the forest, restless and enduring. Locals avoided the road at night, and children were warned never to stray near the grove, lest they be claimed by the same devotion that had drawn the missing travelers to the inn. Letters, diaries, and remnants recovered from the property after its abandonment seemed only to confirm what the townsfolk had long suspected. Margaret and Eliza Cunningham had believed love to be something sacred, something that must be preserved in its purest form. Their obsession, meticulously recorded, revealed a philosophy that was chilling in its logic, an unshakable conviction that affection and devotion could never be allowed to fade naturally, and that those who had been touched by their care were to remain part of that devotion forever. The graves, carefully tended even after the sisters' disappearance, became a dark monument to this belief, a physical manifestation of a love that refused to let go. To this day, the grove remains, the soil uneven in places, the trees arching protectively overhead. Locals claim that on nights when the mist rolls thick and the wind dies, two figures can be seen moving silently among the tombs, tending the lilies, humming lullabies, and watching the forest edge with patient, unwavering eyes. Travelers passing nearby often feel a strange warmth, a pull towards something comforting yet impossible to name, as though the presence of the sisters, and the 43 souls they preserved, still lingers. The Millbrook Inn may have crumbled, but its shadow endures, a testament to a devotion so absolute that it has outlived the sisters themselves, haunting the woods of Kentucky in a way that neither time nor memory can ever fully erase.